We're now at a point where I'd like to talk about how to open your own data set into R as opposed to using one of the data sets that's built into R. First, you need to tell R where to look for the files that you're going to be using. And so one important command to know is get working directory, GETWD, and you have to type open and close parentheses after that. If I do that, R is going to tell me where it thinks I am in terms of navigating the directories on my computer right now. Anything I specify in terms of a file path is going to assume that this is where I started. So if you're using a Mac and it looks something like this, users slash your username, then you get to start any file path you specify with something like documents or Dropbox or downloads or desktop. Now, another thing you can do is change the working directory so that R starts navigating your directories from wherever you'd like it to, maybe a folder you're using for this course. So the way to do that, you could either use a command called set working directory. You can look up the help file for that. Or the way I like to do it, if you go to miscellaneous, change working directory, you can navigate there using just your usual directory navigation. And you can click on the folder you use for this class and choose it. And then any file path you specify will start at that point. But the main thing I want you to see is you have to know where R is going to begin when it understands your file paths. So then suppose I have a data set, tuitiondata.csv. CSV stands for comma separated values, and this is the best way to format data if you're going to read it into R, although R will read in data in lots of formats. The way you open a CSV file typically is with Excel. So if you have a data set in Excel, you can just save it as .csv. And the command you use is read.csv. I'm going to name the object that I read in D. D is going to be a data frame consisting of the data read in from this file. Read.csv. First argument is called file, and then in quotes, I'm going to write the file path. Now remember, the file path begins wherever the working directory leaves off. So if my working directory ends with my username, then my file path is going to begin with Dropbox, etc. If I have changed my working directory by navigating to the particular folder on my computer that I'm using for this course, then my file path should begin after the name of the folder that I use for this course. But for me, it's Dropbox, winter 2015, week 2, part 1. The name of the data set is tuitiondata.csv. And then I want to say header equals true. That's important because that tells R that the first row of my data set is column names as opposed to the data itself. Okay? And now I read in my data set. And when you read in a data set, you always immediately want to check that the dimensions are as you expected, that the column names are as you expected. You want to take a look at the first few values. You want to take a look at the last few values. You will be able to tell if R read it incorrectly because, for example, maybe the first row will contain all the column names, that sort of thing. Or maybe there'll be a lot of blanks at the bottom. You want to make sure that R read in your data correctly before doing anything else. You can also reset your working directory back to just your username by clicking Reset Working Directory. And there's a Get Working Directory option via the menus as well. If you're using RStudio, you may be able to do this sort of navigation via one of the panes that's visible to you in RStudio. Also note that on a PC, you're going to be using backslashes instead of forward slashes. That's one thing that tends to be a common question. So we'll talk more about different formats in the future. One of them is read.table. If you have data that comes in a text document as opposed to a CSV, maybe with tabs in between each value, then read.table is going to be the best way to read in that data. And otherwise, the command's exactly the same. Read.table is just like read.csv. The other thing I want to just mention here is this idea of workspaces. You've probably already noticed that whenever you close R is asking you whether you want to save your workspace. What is your workspace? Your workspace consists of all the objects, everything you've done in this R session. So for example, if I want to see all the objects in my workspace, a couple ways to do it. I can type ls, open close parentheses, and that lists all the objects in my workspace. Okay, and there's different things that I've been working on lately. Here are the objects that are here. So I have the option, if I want, of saving this workspace and saving a different workspace for each project so that I can come back and R will already know the names of all the objects that I've been working with. This can be helpful if, for example, you're dealing with very big data sets or something takes a long time to run and you want to come back to exactly the place you left off in. You can also use this menu called Workspace to do various things. If you say show workspace, For example, it does exactly the same command that I just ran. If you say Workspace Browser, it's going to let you look at the different objects that you have, and it's going to tell you about those objects in your workspace. But look what else is here. You can clear your workspace. Okay, so you can just delete everything in your workspace. You can also save and load workspace files. So if you want to, you can save the workspace you've created and then create a new one to work on some other project and then load the old workspace back in to get back to where you were. And plenty of people like to do that. And you should know that that is an option. However, that's not how I usually work in R, as long as I'm not doing anything that involves commands that took a long time to run. My preference is to always say that I do not want to save my workspace, and then just highlight all the code from a particular code file and run it again. It takes half a second, and I'm back to where I started, and I don't have to worry about thinking about my different workspaces. So again, unless you're doing something that takes a long time to run, my personal suggestion is to never save your workspace, but always use your R code to replicate what you've done so far to get back to where you were.